We'll go on now by using the second string. Second string open you already know, which is B. Open. The next note is C, which is played with the first finger on the first fret. And then D, third finger, third fret. Again, remember to place your finger just behind the fret on its tip, not like that. Also watch out that your fourth finger, when you're not using it, doesn't jump out like that. It's a very bad habit that most beginners have. And it's a result of a lot of tension. So keep that finger relaxed, that side of the hand relaxed, so that the finger just stays above the fretboard. Another bad habit some people have is tucking that fourth finger under the neck. Again, it's a very bad habit to get into. So just keep an eye on that finger. Try to keep it relaxed. Also, when you're moving from one note to the next, try not to lift your fingers up too high. You don't really have to have much motion, just maybe quarter inch, half inch at the most. Also, when you put your third finger down, the D note, if you're going back to your first finger right after that, you really don't have to lift that finger up, because anything that happens behind the note that's pressed down doesn't affect it. So if I put any of these fingers down, it has no effect on the actual pitch, because now the string is cut off at this point, and the only active part is from there to the bridge. The rest is basically a dead note. So you could keep your first finger down if you're going C, D, C. Let's look at study number 4 now. And for study number 4, at this point I want to introduce a new concept in the right hand. That is the use of what's called rest stroke. Up till now, what you've been using is what's called free stroke, which means that when you pluck a note, your finger remains in the air. Rest stroke, however, means that when you pluck a note, your finger rests on the next string, the string below it. And free stroke, like that. Everything else is the same. Same side of the finger, same way of attacking the note. Just that knuckle moving. The rest of the finger not collapsing. It's also important to watch that these knuckles don't collapse. It's quite common for this last knuckle here to bend, to give, so that as you add pressure, that knuckle collapses and then the note is struck. You'll find, especially when playing with rest stroke, there's that tendency. So watch out for that knuckle. Keep it solid so that, again, it's only motion from that first knuckle. So study number 4, you can practice that using the rest stroke. Okay, it's in 4/4 time, quarter notes and eighth notes. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if you're counting that last bar with the eighth notes, it would be 1 and 2 and 3, 4 and. So let's do it once more. I'll give you 4 count, first of all. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's look at study number 5. This one will play free stroke. Actually, you could practice a lot of the exercises, both free stroke and rest stroke, and that would be a good idea because you could equally master your rest stroke and free stroke. Pay careful attention to the right-hand fingering in this study because it's fairly complex. And also note in bar 4, we have a slightly different fingering in the left hand. The second note, D, is played with your third finger, as usual. However, the next note, G, is marked fourth finger. That's because it's easier than skipping with that finger, and it also makes the music flow better. This tends to make the music sound a bit choppy. So make sure you use that fourth finger. It tends to be the weakest, and people tend to shy away from it. But with a bit of practice, it's easily developed. So make sure you use that fingering rather than skipping with the third finger. So I'll give you a 4 count again. Free stroke, and pay careful note to the right hand and left hand fingering. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, let's play that one once again. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's take a look at the Beethoven theme. This is from his 9th symphony, and it's something I'm sure most of you will recognize. There's a few new concepts in this piece. I think you'll note as we go along that each piece I introduce or each study has usually 1 or 2 new concepts. So again, make sure that you master each idea, each technique, and understand each concept before you go on. We mentioned earlier about the dotted notes before we mentioned about the dotted half note. In this case, in bar 4, we have a dotted quarter note. So, as we mentioned before, a dot increases the value of a note by 1/2 of the original value. So a quarter note is worth 1 beat. By adding the dot, we add half that value. So we add half of 1 beat, which is a half a beat. So a dotted quarter note would get 1.5 beats. It would be the equivalent of a quarter note and an 1/8 note. So in the 4th bar, we have a dotted quarter note, which then would take the entire first beat, and half of the 2nd beat. And we have a half a beat left. So at that point, we have an 1/8 note, which looks different from the 1/8 notes that you saw before, because when you have 2 of them, they're beamed together. An 1/8 note by itself looks like it's got a little tail on the bottom. So that note that comes after the dotted quarter note is 1/8 note, and then we have a half note. So that would be played, that 1 bar, if we counted it, it would sound like 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3. So we play just on the 2nd half, and again we count with the ands to find out where the half beat is, the middle of the beat. The other new concept is that of a tied note. If you notice, we have 2 E notes, which are tied together. They have a little line on top, joining the 2 notes. What that means is that you play the first note, and you let it ring for the value of the 2nd note. You don't pluck it So you just pluck the first note. In this case, we have two E notes tied together over the bar line. The reason for that is that we want a note that will ring for 2 beats. But because there's only 1 beat left in the bar, we have to go into the next bar. So we couldn't put a half note there because we don't have that much time in the bar. So we put a quarter note, and then we tie that to the first beat of the next bar. So in other words, if you're counting that, you'd count 4, and on 1, you wouldn't pluck that note. You would simply let it ring as if that was a half note. So that bar would sound like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. We don't pluck that note on the first beat. It just rings like a half note. So I'll play this piece for you. I think by hearing it, you'll get the idea of what I mean. I'll count just the quarter notes, and you'll hear when I play that 8th note that it comes in between the 2nd and 3rd beat. One, 2, 3, 4. This is a fairly difficult piece, so I think you'll find that you have to work at it a bit. It's not a piece that you can just sit down and sight read and go on. Take a while to master. Pay careful attention to the right hand fingering. It's fairly intricate, so it's good if right from the very beginning you play it slowly and do the right hand fingering very carefully. Very quickly becomes a habit, then you can forget about it. Also take note of the left hand fingering, make sure you're using the right fingers.